Welcome to a new daily top Askreddit video. Today's topic:
what piece of history is deliberately being erased from existence? In WW2, how France people in general were pretty okay and open to Nazi ideals. Under occupation, shipping people to camps, etc. But they pretty much rewrote the history, glorifying the resistance force who were just a little group of individuals resisting Nazi occupation. One of the last units defending Berlin was a French SS division. They were probably the most committed German force at that point due to the looming repercussions. At home, the Vichy regime. Yeah, if the Nazis hadn't occupied like 2/3 of France under military rule and had just overthrown the government and put a fascist regime in charge, I think people would be extremely shocked to know how fast France would have enthusiastically joined the Axis powers. Well, true. But it's also important, and very relevant to the topic of conversation, that we also remember that Nazism wasn't exactly a discrete phenomenon. History, or pop history at least, sort of treats Nazism as though it fell out of the sky, as some phenomenon that was profoundly alien to the culture it took root in. It wasn't. Nazism was very much a product of common Eurocentric attitudes of the time. Europeans all over the continent, and especially in the West, had dominionist views of themselves that would make us moderns deeply uncomfortable. They saw people from other regions as less human than themselves, that it was the natural order that a European empire should rule them, and theirs to serve their rulers. This attitude was as common as American exceptionalism was in the 60s to 80s. Universal, unchallenged by the culture at large. A foregone conclusion held by most everyone in all economic classes. If you have a favorite classical European figure, they almost assuredly held this view of themselves and their society. My point is, this was going to happen sooner or later. But for a quirk of fate, Nazism, or some similar analog, could have happened in any number of European nations. Was destined to happen. It just needed the right socio-economic stresses to purify the lump of coal that was Eurocentrism into a diamond. That the French would have accepted it is unfortunate, but not unique, and it's incorrect to view this issue without that understanding. The criminality of the behavior is not theirs alone to bear. Te Rohingya is a very interesting one. They have been indigenous to the Rakhine state for centuries before being driven out in 2016. They were butchered and murdered, raped and expelled with all evidence of being omitted from Burmese records. They now are spread all across Asia, where they are met with great hostilities and are currently globe-hopping, longing to return home. Also, just the general fact that Burma has been in a civil war for the last 75 years in general. Feel like I hardly ever see anything on the news about it. Yes, I think after Aung San Suu Kyi won the Nobel Peace Prize, people imagined everything to be over. Serbs desperately try to negate all the atrocities they did all over Bosnia. Removed. There were more countries in the Axis force than just Germany, Italy and Japan. Major Axis powers: German Reich, Kingdom of Italy, Empire of Japan, other Axis states, Kingdom of Hungary, Kingdom of Romania, Kingdom of Bulgaria, Republic of Finland, Slovak Republic, Independent State of Croatia, Thailand, Kingdom of Thailand. Finland only declared war on USSR unlike others. Thailand joined Axis side because if they didn't, Japan would destroy them. Thailand Kingdom. Hey, let's not get too hasty here. That could be any country's Thailand Kingdom of Thailand. Fuck. The banana republics. As much as I love bananas, I never buy Chiquita. Chiquita is a pretty fucked up company. They were implicated in Banana Gate, which pretty much led to Congress passing the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977. Then, a few decades later, Chiquita pled guilty to making payments to a terrorist organization. And the company is currently on trial for human rights violations for financing paramilitary death squads in Colombia. So, yeah, don't buy Chiquita. I'm Chiquita Banana, and I'm here to say, if you want to get rid of your teacher today, just eat a banana, put the peel on the floor, and then watch your teacher fly out of the door. J. Crew 2. It seems like Old Navy is the only one you really hear about anymore. Expansionist Japan and the atrocities they committed during the 1930s are completely skipped over in most school curriculum, even though it was less than 100 years ago. I've always found that baffling. Oof, I have vivid memories from a video I watched in high school of an elderly Chinese woman explaining very stoically that when the Japanese invaded her community, the soldiers took her and assaulted her repeatedly, including, ostensibly for fun, sticking lit firecrackers in her vagina. I desperately want to say, what the fuck did I just read? But I understand that it's good for stories like these to get out so that people understand how bad the Japanese were during the war. Honestly, one of things about history that baffles me as well. They make the other empires and the Nazis' atrocities look like schoolboy antics. Experiments where people's arms and legs were chopped off and swapped. Eyes injected with acid. 400 deaths from biological weapons testing alone. And it was all done just to see what would happen. One of the things I learned that got me was there were reports of captured soldiers being subjected to vivisections for the sake of teaching university students. You'll read all about how brutal, adamant and proud they were in it at the time, and you begin to understand why the Americans dropped 2 sons on them to end the war with good measure. You ask the Chinese, Koreans or any others invaded and assaulted by them, and they'll tell you 2 wasn't enough. Edit. Little thing I remembered as well. When Oppenheimer was releasing in Korea, the Koreans asked for the release date to be put back to a specific date, so that way they could celebrate the film on their Japanese Independence Day. Recently there was a Netflix K-drama that has some SF elements. Japanese experiments on people-created monsters, based on the Pacific War era. An obvious allusion to Unit 731. The lead actress's Instagram was terrorized by a group of Japanese who considered her being anti-Japanese. But US probably dropped the bombs because of the immense casualties expected for the Japan invasion, rather than their experiments. After all, US did back deal pardon most of Unit 731's atrocities in exchange for the experiment data, which turned out to be garbage. The radical politics of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., particularly toward the end of his life. He was far more radical than what is conventionally touted. Corporations wrap themselves in MLK quotes on January 15 and April 4, but if Dr. King were alive today, he would be horrified at the level of wealth that these private sector entities have accumulated, while we continually fail to provide the basic necessities for human dignity, such as affordable housing and living wages. His anger wouldn't just be directed at wealthy corporate interests but at the many, progressive, special interests that promote idealistic solutions to satisfy their own self-righteousness but result in nothing for the people they are supposedly fighting for. I think his letter from the Birmingham jail is quite well known. First, I must confess that over the past few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klan, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace which is the absence of tension to a positive peace which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of good will is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I heard a podcast where they talked about how his death is shrouded in conspiracies that have been getting more popular lately, essentially muddying up the history of his assassination. I think when someone is outstanding like he was, people will do quite a bit to try to change narratives. He was assassinated when he started a campaign against poverty. That's what a lot of people forget. He was getting ready to do a massive march on Washington for the Poor People's Campaign, the aim of which was to unite blacks and poor whites together. The last time someone tried to do that, the political leaders of the day invented Jim Crow laws. We had human zoos until 1958. Rushed face, fearful face, exploding head. Actually, it was until 1993 in France. There was a theme park in Germany that had a section called Lilliput Land, all the way up until the 90s as well. It had little people living in tiny houses and visitors stare into their living room. The people living there were recruited by the owner of the park in poorer countries like Turkey. Absolutely disgusting. Japanese war crimes and atrocities. Piggybacking on this, the US's failure to prosecute those involved in Unit 731, so that they could keep all of the research for themselves. The fact that the US protected those monsters isn't talked about enough. And U-731's research was done so poorly that the vast majority isn't worth a shit. Horrible what happened. But no one is sweeping this under the carpet, it's openly out there and constantly discussed. Many documentaries about it. I'd say roughly half of WW2 Japan documentaries are all about the human experiments and people like Shiro Ishii. Edit. Geez. Stop commenting on this. I thought of this from a Eurocentric perspective. But I already admitted further down that I was wrong. And that Japan indeed does try to erase this from history. Japan really does not like to talk about the past atrocities. It's openly out there and constantly discussed. In most of the world. Yes. In Japan? No. Yes, I was watching a video about this young man who restores books. He was given an old book by a client who claimed it was ancestral and belonged to his grandfather. Once he'd opened it, he'd seen horrifying images of the Nanjing massacre and described things that he'd never even seen before. He kept the book and donated it to a museum. It was on TikTok, so I'd have to find it. Sweden tried to assimilate Sami people by outlawing their language in schools and outlawing yoiking, traditional chanting, and drumming. Sami women were secretly sterilized by the Swedish government. And that program lasted until the 1970s. BTW secret sterilization without consent happened to Native American women at IHS hospitals in the United States through the 1970s. And in Australia to Aboriginal women as well. It also happened in Switzerland, against the Genish people. All over Europe it happened with e.g. queer and disabled people, some even up to today. It's disgusting to what extent eugenics were applied. Canada, too. Also refer to the 60s scoop. Greenland too. They are still uncovering that, and Denmark loves pretending it never happened. Sweden as well, and Norway. As far as they are concerned, they never did anything ever against the Sami people.